So January is named after Janus, the Roman god Janus. They decided to make January the first month as an homage to his role as a gateway between the past and the present and the future. And so January was named after him. So January and this Janus party is about our journey through remembering and celebrating our past and planning for and preparing for and being excited for our future. And so I'm super excited about all the wonderful thinking that you guys have done for the day. I look forward to your reflections, and I'm super proud and joyful to be a part of this team. I can't imagine anything better. So thank you, and yay to us.
And it's exciting going from this small team to now hearing from some of my friends that are at big consulting firms that have clients, and they say, oh, BEworks' name just keeps coming up around the table. And to fill us with pride, it's like some of the biggest brands ever, and here are my friends telling me that they're talking about you guys, they're asking questions about you, and these are people that aren't even our clients yet. So it's really a testament to how far sort of the small ripple that started off has really spread now, where we're getting inbound requests from some of the biggest brands in the world. We're speaking at some of the biggest conferences, more than we ever have, and our team is growing with brilliant people that are off doing things that I certainly don't always know about, and I'm super excited to hear about all of the work that's been happening. So it's been a shift from us from knowing everything and doing everything to having teams now working on methodology, working on snack time policies, productization. There's so much happening, and there's like this engine that's moving, and it's really just going to take us to where we need to be. So I'm excited to see, a few years down the line, this whole room, will probably be packed with people, and some of you that feel new today or that might be asking, did I make the right choice? Do I know what I'm doing? Are going to be up here, sort of leading the wave as well. So I'm very excited for that. Thanks.
So we're Team A, and today we'll be talking to you about what we've learned from digital channels. So to add to the cliche count, we're going to start this talk with a quote. Going digital is no longer an option. It is the default. This quote represents how clients are experiencing this digital revolution. They see it as an inevitability that's going to happen, and they feel an urgency to get on board. So often we see clients coming to us with various challenges in the digital space. So we're often asked, how do we drive digital adoption? We're also asked, how do we design an effective digital user experience? And another big question is, how do we use digital channels to communicate effectively with our customers? So what we've done is we've gone through each one of these three major areas, and we've identified some common assumptions that clients bring to us when they present us with these challenges. And we'll talk about some data that we've collected that speak to these assumptions. So for driving digital adoption, one common assumption that we often hear is that financial incentives will get customers to switch to digital channels. We know it's more cost effective for us as a company when all of our clients are on things like e-billing compared to print billing. So maybe we'll just pay some of our customers to get on digital channels. So we actually tested for CTFS in the e-statement study. We tested different financial offers, so $0, $5, $10, and we paired these offers with different BE messages to see if we could get customers to enroll in e-statements. And what we found was that BE messages actually increased enrollment above and beyond what was seen for financial incentives. So we question this assumption that financial incentives are all you need to drive digital adoption.
Yeah, so the second question we're looking at is how do we design an effective UX experience? And one of the assumptions we came in with, a lot of people believe that consumers are being overloaded with information, and therefore we need to create more simplistic and minimalistic UX designs as they will be more appealing. And we were questioning whether this was the case for all situations and all channels. So we looked specifically in the financial services where you typically need more information. So a case happened where Canadian Tire changed their landing page in order to try to convert people to use their credit card. And what they found is when they picked a new design that was very simplistic, had a lot of white space, what they found is the conversion rate went down. When we redesigned that page, we took that hypothesis into effect and felt that there's kind of an inverse U in that you need the right balance of information depending on what the product is. And by adding a little bit more detail and some comparisons, what we found is this redesign actually increased the rate of conversion for their credit cards. The second thing we looked at was for TDI insurance. When we wanted to get people to choose a certain insurance package, you needed to give them some information as to what the comparisons were. So our hypothesis that giving people 3 recommendations, 2 of which were decoys, actually increased the likelihood that people would select the recommended insurance package that was offered. The next one after UX is we thought about how do we communicate effectively with customers through the digital channels. So for this one, we looked at education. So it is how do we get people to go to class, and how do we communicate with them that it's important to go to class more effectively. So we looked at, typically in the literature, they had talked about text messages, and that text messages were a better way to communicate with people. It was more direct. People read their text messages. And what we found was that the text message group was actually effective at driving attendance. But so far, based on our preliminary results, the email message has actually been more effective than the text message, showing that perhaps that depending on the nature of the relationship between the customer and the company that's trying to drive this change, it may depend on what channel you should be marketing with.
Okay, great. Another assumption that we came across is transporting what we're already doing in an analog channel into the digital channel. And so in this case, with credit card payments, keeping the same type of payment schedule you would by paying by mail and then just replicating that on a website. So keeping that idea that digital channels can help reinforce a consistent payment schedule. Okay, we'll just make it easier for customers. They can now pay online and they'll have the same payment reminder they would have in the mail. That's a great idea, but we can enhance it further, which is we now have way more flexibility with digital channels to help prompt instant impulse payments, which we wouldn't be able to do as easily with mail. So when we did this study related to impulse payments for one of our large banking clients, we found that emails prompting customers to make additional credit card payments increased the number of people who made those additional payments. So we can really leverage people's assumptions about digital channels and modify them to show that it gives us way more flexibility to nudge behavior than we did previously when we just were living in an analog age. Okay, so Team A, this is our quote. Behavioral science can provide insights that challenge assumptions about digital transformation, but we suggest that rather than targeting a particular channel, we should be focusing on human behavior, and that will be more effective in driving business metrics. Not every channel is the best channel for driving certain types of behavior.
So unfortunately, Natasha is not here, so I pretend I'm like her. So in terms of content, we said what to say, but it's more about, given the things that you want to say, how do you decorate it, right? So if you want to sell credit card, insurance, or some sort of the material that you want to sell to the customers, how do you make it so that the customer, first of all, can understand easier? One way we have done so is to make it more tangible, let them know what exactly that you're trying to sell. and make it more simple. People have limited working memory, limited capacity to understand, particularly the speech unfold over time, and you have limited attention, limited capacity, you're busy. So we have to make it simple so that you can understand. And we also learned that making something salient so that, for example, if you want to convert people from the point card to credit card, you have to make it salient that the point that you get on top of the point card is way more. Like you get more benefit, more award, more reward, whatnot. So you have to make it salient so that people understand what exactly you're talking about. So these are learning from our CTFS work, TD, insurance selling, and all that. The other aspect is making sure, because it's a call that you oftentimes unexpected, people have this tendency to not want to be on a call for a long time. So having this perception of the sense of progress, that how the call will unfold and how much of a thing you're expecting, and where you are in the process of, say, purchasing an insurance plan or upgrading your credit card to whatever, just giving the sense of progress makes customer feel the sense that they know where they are and they want to follow along. And lastly, making it easier. So again, whenever the customer is taking the call, they have always mental calculation of, is it worth it? Right? The purchasing worth it, or getting a credit card or whatnot is worth it. So using these power of free or some sort of loss aversion framing to make it almost easier for them to do the mental calculation. We've seen this work in, again, call center, even the collection call. Right. Okay, so that was about the content, what's being delivered. Now, how we deliver. Okay. One thing that we've seen across all the projects that we've worked on is personalization, or it's all about you, all about the customer. Right? So using the name, first name, rather than the last name or some other formal way of calling you tend to work, although we've seen a little bit of opposite sort of pattern in some projects, but general tendency is that it works. And also appealing to ego. Basically, people like to be said something good about them. But if it's not about just like your dress looks nice or the shoes, blah, blah, blah. It's more about the relationship, right? So you being a good customer to us seems to work well. And feeling of exclusivity, it's about you. Right? I'm offering this limited time offer to you, makes the customer feel like special. Right? Then the normal reciprocity. So given the personalization, it's about you. Basically the idea is eye for eye, which is negative, but the favor for favor. If I give favor to you, you return the favor to me. Hopefully the eye for eye wouldn't happen in the context of customer business communication. But the idea is that we'll do something exclusive for you, kind of trigger the sense that, oh, I as a customer have to return something, which is sign up for a credit card, pay on time, so on.
So the last piece here is about the interaction between the call rep and then the customer who's been calling in or has been phoned. And so a lot of this is really about involving the customer in the process and helping to give them a sense of agency. So a lot of this work has been around co-production. So rather than like, oh, I'll find this for you, framing it so that it's something that we're doing together. So let's take a look at, what information we have about your house, and we'll see what kind of offer I can provide for you. So it's really about getting the customer involved in making those decisions. And so that increases their sense of agency and their satisfaction with the process. The second piece comes from some of the work with CTFS in the training that they do with their call center reps around not just being sympathetic or saying, oh, I'm really sorry that you're in that situation, but actually being empathetic. So like showing that, they're sorry that they're in that situation, but like, let's get into the trenches together and see if we can find a solution to what's happening for you. So hearing about that situation, making the customer feel heard, what's your situation, what's been happening, and then let's see what we can do to come up with an effective solution for you. So these elements together are really about giving the customer a sense of agency and getting them involved in the process.
So through this process of coming up with the content for the talk, what we end up doing is creating a BEworks non-digital communication architecture. So not only we have what and how, but it's about the communication. It's two-way communication always. It's not about the reps or the agent trying to communicate something in some way. It's about including the customer and try to think how that communication unfold. And yeah, basically we have the product right here. So thank you very much.
So Kelly asked us to decide what were our best projects and why, which was no easy task because we've done a lot of projects. We've worked on 43 in 2017 alone. We've worked on 89 since the beginning, and 53% of them have experiments. So it's like, what do we do? How do we decide what to pick? So we started with what we ask our clients at the beginning of every project, and that is, what does success look like for you? So what does success look like for BEworks? So what we did was we stole from Dushan and figured that success is what takes us from here to there. And in the light of our BEworks mandate, it's to transform the economy and society through scientific thinking and using, again, stealing from Dushan, looking at that through three major points. Encompassing our 5-step methodology, the BE method, allowing us to learn as scientists, and does the project allow BEworks to grow? So we decided to choose 3 projects, one from each of our top sectors that we thought were the best. And we're gonna start with the one that started it all, CTFS IVR. So this project, we applied a BEworks, a BE tactic, implementation intentions to IVR call script to get people to pay their debt on their credit card. Yep, saw a big lift, cool, amazing, but that's not the full reason why this is one of our best projects. It's the best because it was the first time we operationalized the BE method. Those 5 steps, put them into action, did an experiment in the real world, which is no easy feat. Clients are apprehensive about experiments. We know that. They don't know about science. And this was the first time we made it happen. We also learned within ourselves. We set precedent by doing a full project, starting that journey from here to there. And in terms of growth, my God, growth from this project. CTFS has been our client since day one. It's been like almost, like 6 or 7 years with them. And we've probably got one of the best BE champions of all time in Dave DeFelice. So yeah, that's IVR. And without further ado, I'm gonna pass it on to Monica for the next project.
All right, so the next project we really wanted to highlight is really a trailblazer in experimental innovation. And that, of course, is AB InBev in context, not surprisingly. So here we had a challenge where the client wanted to know the best pricing and packaging for an in-home draft beer device. It's kind of ironic that I'm here talking about beer, but I'll just continue on with that. Yeah, maybe tonight, I don't know, we'll see. Not making promises, anyway. So the challenge itself seems really simple and seems like a really a direct BE challenge that we typically deal with. But the one minor caveat here is that the product doesn't actually exist yet. So what makes this project really special is, number one, the fact that this allowed us to move into uncharted territories. We were able to insert BE into new product development, but not only that, it really is the way we approached this project that made it all that special. So the easy and traditional way of doing things would be to conduct some focus groups, some surveys, measure intention to purchase, but we're BEworks, so we wanted to really push the limits on experimentation. And as a firm, one of the biggest challenges we have, and something that keeps us up at night, is how do we get from what people say they do to what they actually do. So we always want to get closer and closer to real-world behaviors so that we can measure real-world impact for our clients. And here, with this project, we were able to wiggle our way into the client's heart and managed to get ourselves somehow into 8 stores. And we had to basically make these prototype products that don't exist using sandbags, using communications material that don't exist that we had to create in order to overall maximize the realism of what we're studying. And this, of course, allowed us to measure real, actual purchase behavior. And that's what made this so special to us. But not only that, this project was a case where we turned an out of the box, or I guess in this case, in the box, thinking into a product. So this is the beginning of productization. And even today, we're learning from how we took methodology and how we convert it into a product, and how do we offer these products, these innovative products, to our clients in the future. And that's why we put it on the list. And moving on to the next project.
So the last one on the list is, yes, claps from the back. I like it. At this point in time, before we even engaged in this project, we already as a company kind of considered ourselves as energy gurus. A little bit optimistic, but we did. And then, so we considered ourselves energy gurus for 2 main reasons, right? We had already engaged in work with OEB, and we were launching this huge in-field experiment with the IESO. Then Hydro One came along. They're like, we want in on this. And they asked us to do something that is a little bit more challenging, something that is a bit more difficult to operationally define. And they asked us, how do we deal with the issue of moral outrage? So this project made our list for 3 reasons. The first reason is how we operationally defined moral outrage. That's a difficult feat because there are so many different ingredients or aspects that go into moral outrage. It's not just a behavioral thing, it's an attitudinal thing. The second reason why this project is at the top of our list for energy projects is because it's an example of us standing on the shoulders of giants and standing on the shoulders of what we had done previously. So as I mentioned, we had worked on the OEB stuff. We had worked on the IESO stuff. And we took our learnings from that, applied it to this, and then we learned a little bit more. And we continue to apply what we've learned in this specific project to our future projects. The last reason, or another reason actually, I've got 2 more. Another reason, this project was awesome. So another reason is this huge ripple effect, right? So we're starting to see our work in the public, in the news, in the Toronto Star. People are talking about it, and it's affecting millions of people. Our bills are out there, or maybe not millions, but at least thousands. And the very last thing, we want to point out the woman at the back who was clapping. We gained, we gained our biggest champion from this project. And we think that's extremely important. To define success, we need to build out internal champions within the company. And that internal champion actually decided to join our family. So we couldn't be happier. So you might be wondering what's next. We seem to have accomplished a lot. So where can we really go from here? And we think, at least in context to this specific question, we need to develop as a team what we want to decide is the operational definition for success. And this is just an example. This can be moderated as we continue and move forward. But this is an example of what we would call a matrix with various variables that would be considered in the success bucket.
And this is here. It's not there yet.
Yeah, it's not close.
We're going to take it there.
We're going to take it there, yeah. It's not close to being done, but we kind of started working it out. So with that being said, we just want to say let's continue together working on our mandate and continuing to transform society through scientific thinking. Dun, dun, dun.
All right, so we were given, in my opinion, one of the more difficult questions, which was, what are our most important learnings about behavior? And the reason I thought that this was difficult was similar to the difficulties that the last group had. We've learned a lot about behavior over all of those projects that we've done. So trying to figure out what the most important things from all of that learning was really difficult. So we decided to approach it sort of from 4 different lenses, trying to figure out what was the most important things that we learned from the client perspective, like what was going to be important to them, what was important just from an academic, more behavioral scientist perspective, what was important from a marketing perspective, and then at the end, I'm going to try and figure out what actually from a firm perspective, what was important for us? What are we really needing to take away from all of the things that we've learned? So to start it off, I'll hand it off to Michelle, who's going to talk about the client and behavioral scientist parts.
That's great. So I think when we take a client lens, we have to think about how we can get our foot in the door, and then also at the same time how we can revolutionize how they think about things. So therefore, what we've identified here would be, the finding that there are really easy things that are feasible, that are really good foots in the door for us, that we should implement as a just do it in our business, because that's what's going to get us in the room, that's going to get us those quick, small wins. And so a nice example of that would be our very first project. If we look at CTFS IVR, I mean, we had fabulous results coming out of that research, but the first thing we needed was to hook the person on the other end of the phone. And how did we do that? We did that by changing a simple word. And that's how, in the end, we achieved, this increase, this significant increase in collections and payment behavior. So something very easy to implement. At the same time, we don't want to, really oversimplify, because there's so much power that we've got as behavioral scientists to change how organizations think and to really go after those sacred cows and change the focus from the hippo in the room. So that's where we've got to think about what's counterintuitive that we can really push home when we're working on projects. So counterintuitive things do change behavior. And a nice example would be from that very same project, where the assumption would be that the longer people spend on the phone, the worse it is for you as an organization, and that's not what we found. We found that, in fact, call length is something that is integral to the win that we achieved in the project. So now if we're putting on our behavioral scientist hat, well, we never do take it off. How we operationalize the problem is crucial. And how we think about the problem, whether it is the problem, relies on baseline data and establishing measures that take you from a case-by-case analysis of maybe one question in this part of your business and a question in another part of your business, when you've actually got a consistent measure that goes across your departments and across your problems. You have a research program, and that's what makes you as an organization into a behavioral scientist. And that's what we're really trying to do when we're working with others. So we've got to have this framework from the front end. And at the same time, we've got to know where we can go, which is that it might not just be about nudging individuals. It could be about, in fact, having a greater impact, and that is taking us to look at how to effect firm-level change by impacting organizations en masse. So some examples that we draw from our repertoire, pulling things out of the vault, we can think of AB and Bev. So that's where there was no measure of uptake. They have no idea. It's a brand new product. How are they going to know what the likelihood would be that someone's going to purchase this product? So we were really instrumental in thinking through how to stage the problem and how to establish what the baseline could look like by looking at the traffic in stores and also the pickup attempts. TD Insurance is a great example. You know what their strategic priority is? It's to build trust. Do they have a trust measure? No, they don't. They don't know where trust is at in their organization, and yet that is their strategic priority. So we are, every day in working with them, trying to push them to actually have a trust measure so they know if that's the right direction for them to go. And then TD Loyalty, they don't have a measure of loyalty, so we're building a model with them. We're helping them identify what the attitudinal and behavioral components would be that signal that you've got loyal or perhaps less loyal customers. And another thing that's really crucial here is we're helping them adapt what they've got. So they do have a baseline. They've got analytics and insights. So we're taking measures that they have and we're saying if you tweak them this way, if you look at the number of complaints but also the willingness to have follow-up, that's the way to know if someone's loyal. How much are they going to put into your business? How much do they care? Is it something that they see as their organization or just yours? So moving to that end portion, so it's about nudging behaviors in organizations. This is where academics aren't going right now. And this is where practitioners in the field are going. And that's where our business is going to be able to make a real world difference. So we've done this before. CRA, I mean, you know, we weren't helping them nudge, we were nudging them. But I mean, it was a nudge internally to establish a new culture. And now more recently, our projects, if we're thinking of Environment and Climate Change Canada, it's about having compliance officers learn how to use behavioral science to change the way that organizations report and whether or not they comply. And what we know that's very interesting and different than what might be assumed to be true is that compliance doesn't necessarily need the sticks or the carrots. There are small things we can do to change behavior.
Sorry, go. Great. So now looking at it from a marketing lens. And what do we mean by marketing lens? Well, increasingly, we've been working more and more with agencies, creative agencies, and marketing departments that take a marketing perspective. So they believe in trust in their gut, they believe in intuition, they believe in something called the expectation economy, and they believe a lot in moving forward with ideas often based strongly in culture. So they have this unique perspective that is maybe a bit different than the perspective that we bring at BEworks. And so one of the key findings that we've learned through our dealings with these agencies is the idea that testing is very important and also that null findings can be equally as important. And why is that? Because we need to know if it won't work before we commit to something that could lead to a very big public communication strategy or brand strategy. One example of this is TDI's uninsurance campaign. Going in, they did a lot of focus groups. They did a lot of their own internal testing that suggested that this would be a home run. This would be something that would easily set their brand apart for the next couple years. But they never tested it in a systematic and rigorous way. And so when it came time to actually launch this massive undertaking of a brand strategy, it turned out it fell short. And so had they done rigorous testing, we would have a null finding and we would have learned maybe we should do something a bit different. Another thing that's important is the idea that we can do different wacky and weird things if we have it in a structure of testing, if we use a testing structure. What do I mean by that? So for example, maybe having elephants on a statement, as in one of the experimental conditions we used, to show environmental appeals could be something that might work for your brand or for your communication strategy. And so that's something that we tested in our work, and we found that that was actually the most effective condition. So that was a win for elephants in that case. Another example was the use of balloons. So we wanted a way, this was couched in scientific literature, we wanted a way to increase salience on the actual communications piece. Now what could we do? By leveraging what we know from the literature, we said balloons could be something that you could use, and it turned out once again that this was the best way to present the material. And finally, something that came out of our nudgeathon was this Asigra hammer, which was a very great way to make something more tangible and memorable, was having a hammer and a broken USB token given out to potential clients as a way for Asigra to increase memorability of their communications appeal. So overall, and finally, the last lesson we want to take away from this is that oftentimes we might think that, oh, we should change the perceptions, and then that will lead to behavior. Sometimes you can flip the script. So you can start out with trying to change behavior, and that can then change people's perceptions and their comprehensions. And so a good example of that would be with the Air Miles program. This is awesome. This is just like being in the Grammys or the Oscars, and I'm getting played off. But change behavior, and then you can change the perceptions and comprehension.
Oh, okay. So really quickly, the thing that I want to try and take away from this, like we've seen not just in this presentation, but in some of the presentations earlier, there are certain like behavioral principles and stuff that can be taken, whether it's co-production, Nate mentioned making sure that there was the right amount of information in UX. There are all sorts of behavioral principles, but it's also like, what should we do with these sorts of things, right? So when we look at projects like the Hydra One bill redesign, how can we look at that and think about how else that can be applied in terms of whether there are other opportunities where we can use bills as a communication piece, or other ways that we can apply the lessons of loyalty and the idea that comprehension builds trust. And also just the idea for ourselves that, like we said, experimentation allows us to try really wacky things without necessarily the same amount of risk. So don't let ourselves be limited in what we're trying, and try and make sure that, you know, in all of our experiments, there are some wacky ideas just to see what works. So hopefully these are some lessons that we can take as we do our projects going forward, and improve upon what we do in 2018.
So delayed. A little offended. All right. So we're going to talk about what we learned about nudging. And when I first saw this topic and we talked about it, our initial response was, nudging is hard. Like, really, really hard. And that might sound obvious or flippant or whatever, but it's actually really important, because without that truth, we wouldn't exist as a company. If nudging was easy, everybody would do it. Marketers would do it, companies would do it, and they would do it really well, and they wouldn't need us. But it's not. Fortunately, it's hard. But that means even for us, it's hard. We have a number of examples of cases. A lot of studies that we have done, we test multiple nudges, and usually maybe one or two of them don't outperform their control condition. It doesn't outperform what the company is already doing. So we need to be the best we can at designing nudges and constantly looking to the work we've done before to improve our abilities to make better nudges in the future. So that's sort of how we've approached this talk, is to think about sort of best practices or guidelines or things to think about when you're designing nudges.
Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about targeted nudging. So we know that there are issues with traditional segmentation, like millennials versus baby boomers, and that these aren't really descriptive of how people behave. We also know that we're really interested in understanding predictable patterns of human behavior, and we're interested in understanding how to create tactics to shift a majority of people. And a majority is important to remember. It's not just the majority. It's understanding that, sure, most of these tactics have been shown to be effective and generalized to the majority of the population, but can we target nudging to increase the efficacy and moderate that effect? So the first type of targeted nudging that we want to talk about is common sense targeting. And an example of this is CTFS email collections. So anyone who's familiar with that project, basically individuals who owed money were sent an email to get them to pay their unpaid bills. One tactic that we used was enough is enough. We didn't use that tactic on someone who hadn't paid their bill for a month or less, because that doesn't make sense. So we've always done this common sense targeting approach, where you're going to use different messaging when it's appropriate and not use it when it isn't. The second is preemptive group nudging. So examples of this are CTFS near prime and AOLL. So this is a case where we know that individuals who have a bad previous credit score before getting a credit card with CTFS are more likely to get back into that negative cycle of credit and being too risk-seeking. So we're going to nudge that group, understanding where they're coming from and where they've come from based on their behavior, not metrics like just their age and their gender. That might not be descriptive at all of their spending behavior, and probably aren't. And this other is AOLL. This is the students who are attending the Academy of Learning are not necessarily the same students who are going to Queen's University or McGill. They're coming in with their own separate challenges, and so understanding that as we tailor nudges. And then the third is individual difference modeling, which is something that we're starting to explore with Corvex, and we're really trying to figure out. And the idea here is that individuals differ on there's individual differences in risk propensity, risk perceptions, and likelihood to engage in different risky behaviors, especially in the domain of health and safety. So understanding this can help us figure out what the proper frequency and maybe power of the nudges that we're going to deploy to shift that behavior. So that's something that we're working on.
Hold up, hold up. Oh. Yeah. We're good. Just kidding. So this has been a recurring theme. Teams A and D, I know, really touched thoroughly on this, but we're learning how to nudge our clients. So part of nudging certainly is on customers, citizens, and so forth, but a big part is how we engage with our own clients. So a big part of nudging, therefore, is challenging assumptions, both on the client end and our own, so being open to learn in a mutual way. Many examples have already come up, but one big one was air miles, where they wanted to encourage people to use their cards loyally and believe that the best way to do so was by encouraging emotional loyalty. And certainly that has value. But there is this important behavioral barrier such that the gap between scanning one's card and then getting the reward was roughly 3 weeks. So there's this big behavioral barrier. So we challenged that, their own assumption and provided a different approach, which was based on habit formation, encouraging an in-the-moment incentive or reminder, like hearing the sound of a plane, to encourage that behavior. So you might think that it's plain and simple, but we all hope that it would fly. Anyway, I'll see you. A recurring assumption is the importance of segmentation. Ultimately, questions of segmentation are an empirical one. Do the data bear out that this is the best approach? And oftentimes, such as with GM Scotia, the client has an assumption that they will, but they do not. Lastly, we need to check our assumptions regarding ROI and outcomes. We need outcomes to be measurable and to be meaningful. So to keep ROI in mind, keep the client's interests in mind, but also be assertive in ensuring that what we're doing is scientific and meaningful.
Great. So the last point, you're going to read this and be like, yeah, we know. Every time we test a nudge, we learn something new. Jen had put up a slide earlier, I think it was like 83 projects, roughly half of which are experiments. I guarantee you all of those experiments tested more than one nudge. We've learned a lot. And it's really easy to think about each nudge in isolation. That one time we tested the balloon in the RBC cross-sell. You know, that type of level. We tend to keep them isolated and keep them together. But that does a disservice to us. It's critical that we always keep in mind both the specifics of how that nudge worked in that context and what that means in terms of our larger body of work. A beautiful example of where we've done this is with social proof. We've tested social proof a lot. It's one of sort of our favorite nudges, if you will. It's one of the literature's favorite nudges. It's one of our clients' favorite nudges. They'll like it. It intuitively feels like it should work. But you can see here, this is effect sizes of a number of different, I think it's roughly 80 social proof experiments. And you can see they range. Some of them are really large. Some of them backfire. Social proof doesn't always work. And so it's critical for us to understand what are those guardrails, what are the parameters under which social proof works, how do we design the best type of social proof nudge for the specific context as we move forward. So if you're not familiar with it, we have a document, the social proof deep dive, I think it's called something fancier than that, but I don't remember right now, where we dig into what's the research that we've done, what do we know about social proof. This provides both a repository of the literature on social proof, which is useful if you're not as familiar with that literature, to go in, check what has been done both in the academic literature as well as here at BEworks. But it also poses a number of hypotheses and questions that we need to keep in mind whenever we're designing social proof. So something as simple as, do we want to use injunctive norms or descriptive norms? And that can vary depending on the context. A little bit unfortunately, our meta-analysis doesn't quite yet have enough data yet to have the power to be able to differentiate between those questions. But we always want to keep in mind okay, where are we running social proof? Let's add that to the pile and put it into this meta-analysis so that we can start to answer those questions on a larger scale. This is really what's going to help us design the best nudges. And this is where I'm going to get a little bit cheesy. This is our pal Janice. It's very appropriate to at the end of this talk, but at the end of all of these talks as a whole, to think about this. As we're getting better, as we're growing, as we're designing better nudges, it's very easy to be present focused. It's very easy to think about the projects we're working on right now, design nudges for them. But what we need to do is look to the past and make sure that we're taking all of the knowledge we've gained over the past 80-some projects, use it on the present, and think about where that's going to take us in the future.
Okay, y'all are going to want to pay attention for this one. So this is the long-awaited BE Method 5.0. So a lot of this stuff that I'm going to present today, I'm going to try to be as meta as possible, but there's also going to be stuff that's going to affect your day-to-day practice, right? So there's going to be probably a lot of items that you'll want to discuss, but I do have a lot to get through. So I was going to ask if you guys could pick up the comment cards again and just write down your thoughts as we go. And I'll just get started. So I'm going to present some updates and improvements to the methodology that we made in 2017 and also talk about the process by which we made those improvements. So here's our beautiful BE method, the 5 bubbles, which a lot of you know like the back of your hand. And as we've heard today, we've had a lot of success using this methodology. So it's kind of a special blend of a consulting methodology and the scientific method. And that's what makes it so strong. And it's been working great for us so far. So you might be wondering, why do we even need to improve it, right? It seems to be working fine. So to answer this question, I kind of took a step back and asked, well, why do we need a methodology in the first place? And then, because it was kind of late at night and because Kelly has burrowed into my brain, I then took another step back and asked, why do we exist at all? And this is kind of the slide of the day, right? This is our mandate. So BEworks' mandate is to transform the economy and society using scientific thinking. So thinking about these really overarching broad goals, I identified these 3 reasons why we need a methodology in the first place. So firstly, we need to promote scientific thinking among our clients and among ourselves. Secondly, we need to be able to expand the business, and I'll elaborate on that. And thirdly, Kelly touched on this earlier, but it's a way of incrementally improving our efficiency as a business. So given these overarching goals, what are the things that we need from a methodology? Here are our goals. So in order to promote scientific thinking, we need a methodology that is both rigorous and innovative. In order to expand the business, we need our methodology to be very consistent and also teachable, easily teachable to new people. And to improve upon efficiency, we need our methodology to be formalized. So that way we can incrementally improve the component pieces of the methodology. So what have we done in 2017 in service of these goals? First, we started a methodology club. This is a place where we have meetings and discussions and talk about our methodology. Next, we created a BE method guide, and I'll walk you through that. But this is basically an instructional manual on how to implement the BE method. And lastly, we created a capability maturity model, which really breaks down the methodology into its component processes, and then for each process talks about how mature it is at this point in time. So this is what we need, this is what we did in service of those goals. So you've probably all heard about the Methodology Club, but here I'll just lay out exactly what it is, in case you are wondering. It is a group responsible for making improvements to the BE method and ensuring that it gets stronger and stronger all the time. Who's in it? It's Kelly. Dan is in it by his request. Pizarros in it, and also practice associates who have 18 or more months experience at BEworks, and then also one very specially selected project manager. So why do we have this methodology club? Really, it's to promote critical self-reflection, peer review, meta thinking, and creativity in the work that we do. And this allows us to live up to this company mandate that we've been talking about all day. The BE Method Guide is what's, I think, going to be very valuable to a lot of you. So what it is a series of instructional PowerPoint documents on how to use the BE method, basically. So there's checklists, there's work plans, there's everything organizational you can imagine, and it's broken down by bubble. So the idea is that a new practice associate could start, and on day one, using this method guide, they could start their own project. And it also includes some samples of our best work, because we like to be proud of ourselves, and we also like to show kind of the art of the possible. So you'll be able to find this method guide in the Dropbox folder under BEworks Method Guide. And why do we want to create this? Mainly, the reason is consistency. So we all are being super thorough and consistent in the projects that we do. And also to provide a teachable document for new team members. And maybe if we end up opening a satellite BEworks in another location where we can't really give one-on-one instruction, people at that satellite location should know exactly how to do the BE method like we do here. So here's an example of the ideation section of the BE method guide. So it's got resources, it's got a checklist for you, and it breaks down the core components of ideation. And we've done this for each bubble. And just in case you're wondering, or you have your laptop, this is where it is. In Methodology, Reflections, BEworks Method Guide. And then that last piece that really enables us to become more efficient over time is the capability maturity model. So this is an Excel file. It's a database of the component processes of the method, along with their maturity level, what are the inputs and outputs for each process, and links to all the relevant documentation. This is also in the Dropbox folder. And the reason we created this was to create a formalized set of processes, again, that can be incrementally improved over time. We don't need to make these broad, really huge strides in improving the methodology. We can do so in a piecemeal kind of fashion, and we can divvy up the work among lots of different people. This allows for continual increases in the efficiency of the business. And behold, this is the capability maturity model. It's a little hard to see, but you can explore it on your own and see that this is for one phase. What are the main tasks that need to be done in green? What are the component processes of that task? What is their percentage complete? What's their development phase? Who owns it, last updated? What are the inputs, outputs, client to do, and details links? So there's a lot of stuff in there. So if you ever have, Kaz actually mentioned that it might be useful for people to just kind of print this off, new associates especially, and kind of work their way through each process, because everything is broken down at a really fine level of granularity here. So what's new in BE Method 5.0? The short answer is a lot, and I also don't have a lot of time. And I want to stay kind of meta, but you will have a chance to explore this stuff on your own, and there will definitely be future conversations about each of these new pieces. So the first bomb I'll drop is that we have a new bubble. It's called Kickoff, and it happens before discovery. And it's not necessarily a bubble that we'll be adding to our pitch decks or when we explain our methodology to clients, but this is a really important step that we have to make sure that we go through at the beginning of every project. And Manzon is nodding enthusiastically because it involves the handoff from the growth team to the project team. And so there's going to be an internal kickoff meeting to make sure that as the practice project team, you get all your answers, all your questions answered, and you know the background of the of the project, the context of the project, like what type of project is it? Is it a foot in the door? Is it something that we have a heavy investment in? All that stuff will be covered in an internal kickoff meeting. Another new thing is this project committee, where you'll have some advisors to do peer review on your work. And so far, we've started to implement this with a couple of the projects that I'm on, at least, and I found it to be super, super helpful. So I think this is a really promising step that we've added. We formalized the process of creating the project infrastructure. So things like making a Dropbox folder, how you should organize that Dropbox folder, and adding your project to the project inventory and stuff like that. I've already talked about how you should get knowledge from the growth team about the client project, but this step also includes things like a pestle analysis, which is where you examine a challenge from the political, economic, social, basically every possible angle that you could take on the challenge, just to really build up your knowledge base. So when you go into that first conversation with the client, you're as educated as possible. And then during the client kickoff, you'll introduce our methodology. You'll introduce the project team formally so they know exactly who it is that they should be contacting for what, and go over the statement of work. Most of the time, these things happen informally, but we just want to formalize the process. And you'll find this in the BE method guide. Here's a checklist. Makes it really easy to make sure you get through this stuff. So that's the only new bubble that we'll be introducing. The rest of it should at least be somewhat familiar. In Discovery, we've restructured it a little bit and changed some of the major processes, as you'll notice. So one thing we're going to ask you to do in Discovery is to reframe the problem from both a meta lens and a behavioral lens. So this is sort of an exercise in cognitive flexibility. So you have to look at the problem from different angles and at different kind of granularity levels. So looking at a problem from a meta lens is considering how this challenge affects the client's business as a whole. The customer perceptions, the bottom line, every conceivable way that it could affect the client's business. This is what you're considering and discussing with your project team. Also, you'll be looking at it from a behavioral lens. So what is the stick figure version of this challenge from a behavioral lens? So for example, a client might come to us with the challenge that they want to drive credit card acquisition through FMRs, and they might start thinking about things like what channels you should use, should you give them iPads, like things like that. But we want to look at the core essence of the behavioral challenge. So I think for this one was a matter of social rejection, a feeling of social rejection among the FMRs, and also a matter of grabbing customers' attention when you know that they don't want to be approached by a salesperson when they're shopping. So that's kind of an example of how you'd get to the stick figure behavioral version of a challenge. And I thought as a group, maybe we could take this recent client challenge of increasing visits to the Great Lakes and kind of together work to distill it down to its behavioral essence. So does anyone have some initial thoughts about how we do that? People who were on the project? I know I picked this one because a lot of us were in the ideation session. Yeah, so Zach mentioned the intention-action gap. So if you're able to distill a problem down to its behavioral essence, just stripping away the channel, stripping away all the other details, then you can start to broaden your literature search or the nudges that you come up with. So this is kind of something that we think we should be encouraging really early on in the process.
Oh, I have a thought.
Yeah.
How do you get people to connect to a resource that feels like it's highly abundant?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So
getting people to care about
abstracting
that
it.
feels like it's always readily available.
Yeah. So going from water activities to exactly what Warda just did, extracting it, abstracting it, and making it about something, anything that is just super abundant. That's exactly the process of abstraction that we're talking about here.
You can also even do it with, and link it to some of our energy work too, with this, the fundamental behavior of conservation.
Yeah, and overconsumption. If you think of it as an overconsumption problem, then you can widen your literature search and look at eating.
And also overcome the notion that of like pollution, right? Like a lot of times people don't want to engage with the lake because they just think it's too polluted.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an app that measures that so that you can check every day. Hey, they're putting a sign up.
So another thing that we've added here is identifying guardrails. This is kind of just gathering constraints. So establishing the area in which you're playing with this project. Just going to go quickly through them because you'll have a chance to read these later. Another new thing is the scientific assessment. So with your client, you can assess their capability to run experiments, their data analytics capabilities. How capable are they of thinking scientifically? So you can ask kind of leading questions, probing at their ability to kind of understand our method and understand the rationale of the things that we're proposing. You can uncover their assumptions and priors in this way too. You can also, through just speaking with them and asking targeted questions, you can get at their risk tolerance and also their expectations. So in behavioral diagnostics, this one hasn't changed as much as the initial setup has in Kickoff and Discovery, but there are a few new things that have been added. So for example, when you're doing a literature review during BD, as a team you can get together and ideate on which search terms you want to use. And you can inventory these search terms and just put them in the Dropbox folder. So that way, if somebody else is working on a project later on that's similar, they can just use your search terms. So this is something that you'll start inventorying. You can mine our past work for relevant insights. As we have a more structured and organized Dropbox, this will be easier to do, right? And it's getting better all the time. And these are just some things that you'll want to make sure that you're doing during a literature review, making sure that the evidence you're presenting as rationale for your ideas is from high quality journals and it's not retracted. So another exciting new thing is the BE Research Collection. So this is a growing inventory of research slides that you can just pull from and put into your client presentations. But the caveat is that you also need to add new ones that you make. You have to make sure that it's going both ways, and eventually, hopefully, it will cut down on the amount of time that we're spending making new research slides, because a lot of the time we cite the same principles. So here's just an example of some of the research slides that are currently in there, and you'll find it under the Research collection. It's actually really easy to find that way. Because if you search research in our Dropbox, you get a lot of results. There's only one hit for this bad boy. So that's where you'll find that. And remember to add stuff from your recent projects. Okay, another change is around journey maps. So our journey maps are a little bare bones right now. Ideally, what we're moving toward is a journey map that looks more like a journey. So it has illustrations, infographics. It's a bit more intuitive for clients to understand because maybe they're so entrenched in what their customers do and what their business is that when you reduce it to chevrons, it's a useful exercise in a way because it gets them thinking about these core behaviors, but it feels a little removed from them. So we're going to try to move toward more intuitive journey maps. And we're also going to have 2 different versions. So this is relevant for the growth team because you'll want to, through your conversations with potential clients, you can identify whether they would want a high-level journey map or a super detailed journey map. These are 2 different offerings that could be priced differently. And we have examples of those as well in the method guide. So for barriers, we have a new BD toolkit. So all of you will know about the BD toolkit we have online and also the Excel sheet we've got. But this one is new and improved. It's more comprehensive and it's more nuanced. And it is currently in the Google Drive, and it should have been shared with all of you because in the summer we were working on it together through our power. So again, if you have time, you could start adding to this. This is something that we see as being really valuable for our BD, but also a potential productization opportunity. So if you have time, please feel free to add to this growing inventory. Another new thing we've added, and this is not super new, I know a lot of you have done this already, but I just wanted to present it because this is the new way that we're going to be doing BD in the future. So we're going to be presenting clustered barriers or higher level barriers instead of a million fine-grained barriers across the journey. So I'll show you an example from Colgate. So here is their, this is the customer journey of buying toothbrushes, and here are all the fine-grained barriers that we identified in this process, but this is overwhelming and not intuitive to the client. And in a way, it's not even really that useful for them. So you can do a bit of a cluster analysis in your mind and identify what are the biggest barriers here. This allows for much more focused ideation as well. Okay, speaking of ideation, there is also going to be a new nudge encyclopedia that's coming. So this is kind of long awaited for some of us. We all have our own little tools that we use, but we want to standardize it and make a big inventory of cool nudges that are indexed by sector, channel, and potentially by the barrier that they're aimed at overcoming. We're also going to tag them with little memory cues like coin study. So we've already kind of informally developed this language around the footprints, and we all know what we mean, right? So we're going to start tagging them with little memory cues so that it makes it easier for us all to share and discuss cool nudges. And hopefully this will reduce reliance on availability or familiarity during ideation so we don't keep coming back to the same ideas again and again. You'll be able to consult this inventory. And this is something that Kelly's students might help us with. We talked about that. Otherwise, it'll be up to us.
I heard it.
Okay, another cool thing. Sorry to blow your minds, but this is the deep dive guidebooks, which some of you have been exposed to through a Lunch and Learn. So the goal of these deep dives is to help us to design the best interventions possible. And it does that through a deep dive into the literature and detailing the nuances of the phenomenon. So when does it work? When does it not? In which context does it have which effect? And so it's going to also identify internal hypotheses. Because we're all scientifically minded, we do these deep dives, and naturally we come up with hypotheses that have not yet been tested. So if you read through this deep dive guidebook, then you might identify an opportunity to test one of our internal hypotheses. So that's another thing to keep in mind. This is going to be really useful during ideation and also during experiment design, if you have the opportunity to test one of the hypotheses in the guidebook. Here's an example of our first one. It's the Social Proof Guidebook, and you'll find it at this permanent link, and do not rename. So we also have a bit of a simplified prioritization procedure. So we've done it a lot of different ways. We've had a lot of discussion about this, and we settled on just the easiest thing. Let's just get internal ratings on expected BE impact and creativity of the idea, and then get client feedback on feasibility. So that way it can guide and shape your final recommendations. This is right now what we're going with as the uniform prioritization procedure for all of us. Okay, what's new in Build an Experiment? When you're creating an experiment design, it'd be helpful if you create a visualization of the design. And I can show you an example of this, but really The purpose of it is to get you to write down very concretely and tangibly what it is that you'll be testing. And that way it's easy to subject to peer review as well. So I'm just going to show you a very Dave Corp version of this. This is a visualization of the Toronto Hydro experiment that we're doing. He's got exactly how he did the power calculation. He's got various pieces of information about the stimuli, and all of these things were subjected to peer review, and we had some really rich discussion around, well, why did you calculate power that way? And then, you know, we all learn things from those discussions. So this, I feel, is a really valuable exercise, and it allows you to catch any problems with the design before proceeding. So there will also be in the future a repository of measures, so that way we don't always have to go back to the drawing board, right? If you're measuring comprehension, if you're measuring perception of value, we've done that a million times. So right now what you have to do is go through our past experiments in Qualtrics, or just look at case studies, and draw metrics from there, from what we've previously used. In the future, we will have these things organized into an inventory.